Welcome everyone to a new MedTech webinar at Product Life Group. Today we will be discussing the topic of the EU Regulation 2024-1860, Interruption and Discontinuation of Medical Devices. Today we are blessed to have 𝗂𝗂𝗂𝗏𝗂𝗏 and Samuel Ghweb, both consultants at 𝘀𝗏𝗃𝗃, one of the Product Life Group companies. Before we begin, please note that this webinar will be recorded and we will share the recording with you by email after the session. At the end of the webinar, we will also have a Q&A session, so please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A section and we will address them at the end of the session. So thanks for joining and enjoy the session. So Samuel, 𝗂𝗏𝗂𝗏, you can start.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to this webinar. First off, I will just have a few words on the company itself. So Product Life Group is operating in more than 150 countries with our own resources in more than 50 countries all over the world. Just so you have a small grasp on our capabilities in MedTech, we are currently more than 60 MedTech experts in Europe, based on more than 10 sites. We also have consultants that are working in the MedTech field all over the world, particularly in Americas, in Australia, and in Asia. This webinar is part of a series of webinars, which is based on a focus on the Regulation 2024-1860, which was published in June last year. This first webinar will be on the management of shortages, how to evaluate your portfolio, your product portfolio, and how to notify and communicate with all the players that are involved in this regulation. The second webinar will be in early Q2 2025, so probably next month. It will be based on 𝘂𝗶𝗀𝗏𝗏 and its modification of dates of application, basically. So we will touch more on that in a second webinar. And the third webinar will be on in vitro diagnostics, because this regulation introduced an extended transition period for pretty much a lot of the products, which provide a slight breather, but the challenges related to the change of regulations are still there. So please join us if you're interested in this topic. It will be probably late Q2, so early June 2025. So if we get back to the topic at hand, we will first discuss about the context surrounding the management of shortages. The second aspect will be the key concepts introduced by Regulation 2024-1860. Then in the third part, 𝗂𝗏𝗂𝗏 and I will discuss more about the different obligations that were introduced by these regulations. So we'll basically segment the article into several sub-processes, discuss the different obligations related to the sub-processes, and provide some recommendations. And last but not least, we will finish with our motto, which is keep it simple. So first off, let's start with a bit of context. I just want to reiterate, if you have any questions on this webinar, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A section in the Zoom meeting, and we will discuss them at the end of the webinar. Just to give you a brief history surrounding the regulations surrounding shortages of medical devices. So if we get back to 2021 and 2022, as you're all aware, the MDR and IVDR became applicable at this date. And in the meantime, we had a publication, so a regulation, the Regulation 2022-123, that was adopted by the European Parliament following the COVID crisis, and several national initiatives that reinforced the role of the European Medicines Agency in crisis preparedness and management for medicinal products and medical devices. Became applicable in 2023, and particularly Chapter 4 on the monitoring and mitigation of shortages of medical devices. Please keep in mind that even though this regulation has somewhat of the same topic, it's not directly correlated to the Article 10A, which was later published in the Regulation 2024-1860. This first regulation, the regulation 2022/123, is really in a case of crisis management, and basically increases the role of the European Medicines Agency with the creation of a medical device shortage steering committee group that basically should identify lists of products that are necessary to manage a crisis upon the arrival of this crisis. So it's really centered around the role of the European Medicines Agency. The regulation 2024/1860, which was later published in 2024 in June, implements new requirements that apply to all of the players in the field of medical devices. And particularly, we will see later on the manufacturer. So this regulation, the 2024/1860, is more related to previous initiatives, national initiatives. For instance, in France, we had an initiative that became applicable in 2021, surrounding the role of the manufacturer in the preparedness for its own shortages, its own discontinuations of products, and the communications associated with these shortages, so that all of the players in the healthcare field are aware of such discontinuations or interruption of supply. This regulation was later on, a Q&A and a form were later on published in December to add like provisions to the regulation, to add more understanding for this regulation, which is quite short. And this regulation became applicable in January this year, so the 10th of January. So as we will see later on, the regulation itself, the Article 10A, is quite small. However, the Q&A and following publications provide more information that you can use to make sure that you comply with this article. The objectives of this regulation concern pretty much everybody in the field of healthcare. First of all, the first objective is for the players. So what I mean by players is mostly the economic operators. One of the objectives of this article is to ensure that there is a proactive sharing of information of all of the players in the supply chain to limit the impact on the supply of devices and identify mitigation measures. So basically, anytime that we have a risk of having an interruption or a discontinuation of a product, which would affect the public health safety, or which would seriously affect individuals, then everybody in the supply chain should be made aware. The second objective is to inform authorities. So ensure the transparency with competent authorities in all of the countries concerned. So we'll see later on how it works, in order to identify the need to put in place ad hoc public health policies at a national or European level if necessary. And last but not least, it is really to ensure that the impacts are limited for the patients. So in fine, this regulation aims to limit the impact on the healthcare institutions, the healthcare professional, and most importantly, the patients, in order to ensure a high quality continuous care service all around Europe. So one of the questions that you may ask yourselves is, are you concerned? Basically, pretty much all of the economic operators are concerned by this regulation. It's mostly targeted towards manufacturers, both in Europe and that are not in Europe. But all of the economic operators are concerned by specific aspects of this article introduced by Regulation 2024/1860. It concerns also all medical devices under MDR, all in vitro diagnostic medical devices under Regulation 2017/746, so IVDR, and also all legacy medical devices. The only exception is custom-made medical devices. It's pretty much straightforward. It mostly concerns industrial products and the risk of shortages of such products. And this regulation is already in force, so you should be made aware that it's already in force and try and get compliant as soon as possible. And now I leave the floor to Clémence to present to us the key concepts of this regulation.
Thank you, Samuel. So, let's try if you can change the slide. Okay, good. So Regulation 2024/1860 requires manufacturer to anticipate an interruption or a discontinuation of the supply of a device. The Q&A mentioned by Samuel, provided by the Commission, give us clarification regarding these terminologies and what is considered as interruption or discontinuation. A discontinuation supply is when the manufacturer confirms that it will cease the supply of the device and therefore no longer place it on the union market. An interruption should be understood as having a temporary inability to place devices on the union market with an expected duration of more than 60 days. But the Commission also precised that it should not prevent the manufacturer from notifying a supply interruption lasting less than 60 days if they assess that this may result in serious harm or a risk of serious harm to patient or public health. The notification should be provided at least 6 months before the anticipated interruption or discontinuation, except under exceptional circumstances. In that case, the notification should occur without undue delay. We will come back to that later. We are talking about 60 days, but it also understood that the notification should happen 6 months before the start of the 60 days of interruption. The reasons of interruption or discontinuation can be multifactorial, and for many reasons not limited to regulation consideration. This may, for example, include external factors with a direct impact on the manufacturing process or supply of the device. The manufacturer will have to specify the reason for the interruption or discontinuation of the supply in the form used to notify the competent authorities. This form is provided in the MDCG guidance. According to the new regulation, the manufacturer shall inform the competent authority of the member states where he or its authorized representative is established, as well as the economic operators, health institutions, and healthcare professionals to whom he directly supplies the device. This requirement has impact on relation and cooperation between the manufacturer and entities that he has to notify. The competent authority, the authorized representative if he is concerned, and entities directly supplied by this manufacturer. It also has impact inside the manufacturer organization, because each business unit inside the manufacturer organization could have information regarding disruption or discontinuation, and should bring cooperation between this business unit. It can be manufacturing, supply, quality, sales, marketing, management. And upstream, the manufacturer also have to strengthen cooperation with suppliers to be aware of any information that could lead to disruption or discontinuation with health impacts. Now, let's move to obligation and recommendation to put in place a robust process to comply with this Article 10A and this regulation. To meet the requirement mentioned previously, a robust process must be put in place, and it can be composed by mapping device concerned, identify the supply chain and identify the risk of possible disruption or discontinuation, evaluate the situation and under which delay, notify to the appropriate entity, communicate with partners. all these stages apply to manufacturer. But communication also applies to the distributors that have to communicate the information to another downstream entity. It can be another distributors or health institution, for example, but also applies to the competent authorities that has to communicate with other competent authorities where the device is supplied. Let's review more deeply each step. First, mapping. It is important to map your devices for which a storage may pose an imminent risk of death, a serious deterioration of patient health, or a life-threatening condition where no suitable alternative is available. Some tools can be used, such as the risk analysis of your devices, the clinical performance, the intended purpose, or the identification of clinical alternative. Sorry. The second step is to identify the supply chain. Who supply what to who? When a change occurs, does this change can have an impact on the supply? Do you have sufficient control on sourcing? Or maybe do you have plan to dual sourcing? Are there quality agreements between your supply and you that plan to be informed of any risks of shortage? Are you able to identify your direct supplier and identify all the person to inform? This is a question that you will have to answer before to move to the next step, the evaluation. In your evaluation, you should also take into account the overall population to determine the health risk. It is also possible to involve, for example, KOL or health association in order to evaluate the impact of shortage. Another approach is to identify information that you have internally and identify to what further information your partners may have. For this evaluation, Medtech Europe has published in March a decision guide flowchart. It gives a decision tree on different situations to determine if it should be notified or not. This document can be a good tool, but just to keep in mind that it's coming from a professional industrial association. It is the regulation that it is binding. A decision tree may be provided later by the European Commission or through a MDCG guide.
So we just saw the upstream obligations and recommendations for this regulation. Now let's look at the notification and communication aspects. So the notification is only applicable to the manufacturer. The manufacturer shall inform the competent authority of the member state where it or its authorized representative, in the case where the manufacturer is outside of Europe, is established, of the anticipated interruption or discontinuation. And as we saw earlier, it should be provided no later than 6 months before the anticipated interruption or discontinuation. So one thing to keep in mind is this is a time-sensitive process. So are you able to gather the information at least 6 months prior? That's a key question. For that, do you have a process up to date with also the identification of the correct authority contacts? Just to keep in mind, you inform only the competent authority where you're located as a manufacturer or where your authorized representative is located. However, in the form introduced by MDCG 2020-416, you write all of the countries that may be affected by this disruption of supply. And then the competent authorities liaise with one another through their own SharePoint, and then they have the information. Do you have a reference to this specific form, the MDCG 2020-416? And do you have also triggers to update the notification? So this form, you can see in the form that update to the notification are on a voluntary basis, at least for now. But in some cases, it would be interesting to inform the competent authority, or even at the request of the competent authority, of the modification of the interruption or discontinuation. For instance, if you plan on having a discontinuation for around 60 days, and the discontinuation evolves in a longer term situation, then it would be interesting to notify the competent authority that the lack of supply will last longer, because this has quite a few impacts on the healthcare institutions, the healthcare professionals, and the patients in the end. So for that, you should define a communication strategy with the competent authorities. Usually, you should already have that for the topics, so you can build on what you already have and add on to the specifications of this specific article, Article 10A. You should also define key evolutions that would trigger an update to the notification in the case where you want to notify of any updates to shortages that you may encounter. As we saw earlier, some interruptions cannot be anticipated, and if we look at the Q&A provided by the European Commission, these may include natural disaster, you cannot anticipate it at all, an interruption due to a sudden inability to obtain raw materials or components, and a discontinuation due to unexpected circumstances, including of an economic or financial nature, which could happen if we look at the current political landscape. It's definitely something that could happen. So the manufacturer should still notify the competent authority without undue delay and communicate the interruption or discontinuation to the economic operators, the healthcare institutions, and the healthcare professionals. And in this situation, if you notify later than 6 months prior to the interruption, you should be robust on your explanation on why you notified so late. And last but not least, the communication. So this requirement applies to all of the economic operators in the supply chain. So all the economic operators, we have received the information from the manufacturer or from any other economic operator in the supply chain, shall, without undue delay, inform any other economic operators, healthcare institutions, and healthcare professional to whom they directly supply the device. So basically, your role of communication stops at the economic operators, the healthcare professionals, and the healthcare institutions to whom you directly supply. So if you are the manufacturer and you supply to distributors who then distribute to other distributors or to healthcare professionals, you just notify the first line, the distributors, and then they will notify their own customers. For that, all economic operators should be able to identify communication related to shortage from other suppliers. They should be able to identify all the customers for the specific device. So that's something that you should already do, because that's something that is introduced already by the MDR and the IVDR, but still something to keep in mind. And are you able to process the communication in a timely fashion? As we can see, this is also time sensitive. It is also to be done without undue delay. And just to keep in mind, when you do the notification to the competent authority, in the form, there is a specific section that covers these communications. Have you already communicated to your customers? Have you already communicated with your importers, your distributors, your direct customers? That's something that is required in the form. For that, what we would recommend is to ensure that you have adequate quality agreements with all of your suppliers and also your distribution partners, that you have defined a communication strategy with these partners, and to ensure that you have a list of customers that is exhaustive, and not exhaustive at one time, but you keep the exhaustiveness of the list all along your product life cycle. So to sum everything up, basically this article mainly focuses on the role of the manufacturer. The manufacturer should map the criticality of the device, anticipate interruptions and discontinuations, with its strengthened partnership with its suppliers, its distribution partners. And then this manufacturer should initiate the communication cascade. All the economic operators in the supply chain should be sure that they receive this information and that they share it with their own customers so that the cascade is not stopped at any point. So requirements may appear simple, but they have many implications. They are all centered around the responsibility of the manufacturer, and there are sometimes sensitive considerations. So we saw the 6 months for the notification, the 60 days of interruption, the undue delay for the communication. So you need to build a robust process for this aspect. Just also keep in mind, you can delegate the task of communication and things like that to other suppliers. However, the responsibility still lies with the manufacturer and economic operators for the communication aspects. With that in mind, we want to keep it simple. One thing that you can do is build on your existing work. So basically, this regulation is brand new. Well, it's somewhat new, let's say now. But the work that you need to do surrounding this regulation is not new at all. You can definitely capitalize on your process and product risk analysis, where you may have already information on how to deal with shortages, disruptions, interruption, discontinuations. So please build on this. It's already a huge part of the work that is already done. You need to plan how to manage these interruption and discontinuations, but please keep in mind that the regulation mostly covers extreme scenario. If we look at the requirements regarding the notification, you have the possibility of doing an assessment that includes many factors. So first off, is your product in an indication where there would be risks for, well, serious risks for the patients and public health safety? That's one thing. But then even in this situation, are there potential alternatives for your product on the market? So in the end, it's really more if you are like in a somewhat of a monopoly situation where the disruption would really increase the risk for the patients, or if you're in niche markets where the disruption would lead to no treatment or no diagnosis, where this notification is required. So you can look at the nice decision tree that MedTech Europe provided this month to have all that in mind. And last but not least, I know that sometimes it's not easy to like highlight your approach to the rest of the company, particularly to business unit, to sales and things like that. But this approach is definitely in line with commercial considerations, because disruption leads to a loss of revenue, a loss of, well, an impacted brand image. So definitely present it in a way that you can benefit from this approach to improve your business intelligence. So that's pretty much it for the topic of this webinar. Just to finish off, I just wanted to have a quick word about our services. So Strategical is a company of the Product Life Group that is supporting medtech companies with quality, regulatory, and clinical services throughout the medical device and in vitro diagnostic medical device life cycle. We work from the early stage to the post-market surveillance. So all along the product life cycle, we come from different backgrounds, competent authority, notified bodies, industrial companies, and even professional associations. So we have consultants from pretty much every single background that you can think of that can work on these topics. And if we look at shortage control, we can definitely assist you in building your process, support the evaluation of your product portfolio, establish or review the QA agreements that you may have with your suppliers and distribution partners, and audit your process. So thanks a lot for your attention. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them now.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Clemence and Samuel, for your valuable insights. Now, I invite every of the participants to submit their questions in the Q&A section, and Samuel and Clemence will be happy to answer them. As I can see, we have already one question. I will read it. In the example where legacy moderate risk IVDD devices are being discontinued in the EU, not transitioning to IVDR, but would be considered a class C, how should we document our decision not to notify? That is, alternative products are available. So, Samuel, Clemence, if you want to answer.
So, just to have a full understanding of the question, is it in a situation where no replacement with IVDR compliant products is envisioned?
I invite the panelists to clarify the question if he can. Otherwise, we will be able to answer it. Yeah.
We can answer the two sides of the question. So if you have an IVDD product that will be discontinued, and then you don't have a replacement that will be IVDR compliant, that's the first situation. Then in this situation, you will need to assess whether your product could include a risk for a serious risk for the patient or for the public health safety. So basically, with the absence of your product on the medical landscape, does it impact healthcare professionals, healthcare institutions? So I heard it was for IVD. You can think about whether your product is for a closed system, an open system. Can the instrument be used with other consumables that would be adequate? Then later on, you can also evaluate whether you are in like a majority, if you have the majority of shares on this specific market, this specific indication, which would increase the risk. And then you can find if there are alternatives, whether exactly similar or with other technologies. But for that, I would really recommend looking at the decision tree by MedTech Europe, which covers all of these questions. So if you document with the decision tree provided by MedTech Europe, it can be definitely helpful. In the second situation where you have IVDD products that you want to discontinue, and for instance, you have new products under the IVDR that pretty much have the same application, then you don't need to notify it. It's written directly. I think it was on the Q&A.
Great. So we have two more questions. First, we go with Babik. Does it mean now that every medical device manufacturer needs to have a product discontinuation or interruption?
Meaning that I don't really fully understand the question. So does it mean that
I'm not sure if this question is super clear. Yeah.
No, I think the question is if it's does it concern every manufacturer of devices that have interruption or discontinuation? The regulation precise that it's devices for which it could have impact on health patient like death or public health.
So from previous experiences where I worked on this specific regulation, basically, if you don't have products that would pose through their medical application any serious risk to the patient or to the public health safety, you need to document at least that you have evaluated that the risk is not there and that there will not be a need for notification and communication in the future. If, however, you have product in your portfolio that may where an interruption or discontinuation may lead to high risk for the patient or the public health safety, then you will also need to consider the notification and communication aspects.
Great.
But for the first part, for what Clemence presented in obligations, it concerns pretty much all the manufacturers. Yeah.
Okay. Again, David has another question. If the manufacturer doesn't want to continue their legacy device under the MDR, then also the manufacturer needs to inform the competent authority and the economic operators?
Solely in the case where the discontinuation could pose high risk for the patients and the public health safety. So for this situation, I would also recommend to look at the decision tree by MedTech Europe. Base your rationale on this. Please keep in mind that the only legally binding document is the Article 10A in the MDR and the IVDR, so you need to make sure that you comply with this article. But you can definitely help yourself with the decision tree provided by MedTech Europe. And if you look particularly at the Q&A and the form, the regulatory considerations, and particularly the discontinuation of legacy devices, is one big part of the application of this regulation. Basically, from our understanding, the competent authority wants also to anticipate the risks posed by the lack of certification under the MDR and IVDR, and this is one way to map the products that will not be available later on.
Great. So we have another question. In the case that we have a discontinuation of a device, should we make any process in 𝘂𝗿𝗏𝗃 to declare it?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear the middle of the question. Can you just repeat it, please?
It's okay. It's okay. In the case that we have a discontinuation of a device, should we make any process in the 𝘂𝗏𝗃 platform to declare it?
So no, it's not currently in the 𝘂𝗏𝗃, so you should contact directly your competent authority where you're located. So for instance, if you're, let's say in Spain, you contact the Spanish competent authority, and then you send the form so you need to look first at if there are specificities in your country for the declaration, the notification process. You send the form that is provided by the MDCG, and then the role of the competent authority will be to liaise with the other competent authority. Currently, that's the way it's going to be. Depending on the workload, we may have evolutions in the future, but not in the near future, like in some years, where we will need to notify in 𝘂𝗏𝗃, but that's not the case now.
Great. So we have last question, it seems. Well, first of all, thanks for this nice presentation. The attendee says, so thank you for that. The question of the attendee concerns the possibility of limiting the intended purpose of an IVD product. Shall the manufacturer also need to notify this?
So in the case where you have a product, from what I understand, it's in the case where you have a product under IVDD and you limit the indication, well, the intended purpose for the IVDR, which I think many in vitro diagnostic medical device manufacturers will have to question themselves about. So currently, there isn't any specificities specifically for this. We can definitely try to get more information, more in-depth information for this question. I will not be able to answer it straight away now. So we will, if you're okay with that, we can get your email and then send you a nicer answer, let's say, at a later stage. But if we look at the availability of the product itself, I don't think it will change much. Then it will depend on the customers themselves if they want to still use them for the other intended purpose. But I will check it in more details and I will get back to you for this. Okay,
great. So for this participant, as it is anonymous, if you want to share with us your email, Samuel and Clémence will answer by email this question. So I don't see any more questions. So I think that we can end up the session and the webinar. Once again, Samuel and Clémence, thanks a lot for sharing your knowledge with us, and thank you to all the participants for joining to this session. If you are interested in learning more about this topic or any other related to medical devices, please feel free to reach out by email. Also, just for your information, next week on Thursday as well, we will host another webinar on market access for medical devices in Europe, and we would love to have you there. So feel free to join us. And furthermore, we will continue to host more webinars with Strategical and other product-led group affiliates in the upcoming months. So stay updated on this and other product-led group news by LinkedIn. We highly recommend you to follow us in our LinkedIn profile. So to end up, thank you for joining, and we look forward to see you in future webinars and events. We can close.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.